The Invincible War, a rather interesting concept that introduced several new Invincible variants that were each evil in their own right, but each had their own personalities. Some were incredibly sadistic, some were incredibly stoic, and some of them were just overconfident. Even had an evil Mark that wanted his mom back and wanted to just kidnap his mom from this entirely different alternate dimension, but that's beside the point. The question that I want to answer in today's video is who is the strongest among these evil Invincible variants? Is there a possible way to tell if all the feats on screen in the TV show or no? Well, let's get straight into this video. Now, there are going to be two caveats to this video. Number one, only the TV show scaling. I know for one of them in particular, they end up getting amped if we use the comic scaling. Or well, actually two of them get amped, but I'm going to cover that later in the video. But number two, and this is going to be the more important one, I'm not going to talk at all about Sinister Mark in this video. I've already covered my arguments about Sinister Mark to death by this point, so I feel like covering him again is just going to be pointless. It's going to be repeated knowledge and repeated information. If you do want to find out more about Sinister Mark, either check out my Conquest versus the Invincible War video, or check out my top 25 ranking of Invincible characters. Though I will be releasing some videos in the future because after that video, my stance on some of the characters have been updated. Most of the top though hasn't really been updated. In particular, an Immortal video is coming out pretty soon because I feel like I downplayed him in that video, so be prepared for that one. So in particular, who are the marks that are on the chopping block? You've seen the thumbnail, you know exactly who the three of them are going to be. It's going to be the Mark that has a Mohawk, Hood Mark, as well as finally Omni Mark. Mainly because a lot of the other marks don't really have that many feats. Like, I know in the comics, Viltrumite Mark is the one that kills Spawn, but he doesn't do that in the TV show, so not counting that. But yeah, in case you're wondering why no Goggles Invincible and Goggles Invincible isn't going to be on this list, scaling both the Guardians of the Globe and the Teen Team isn't enough in my opinion to be put in this debate. Mainly because they might scale around the same level as Season 2 Mark, however, I think that scaling low or even mid-end relativity to Mark in Season 3 is better than just scaling above the Guardians of the Globe and Teen Team. Mainly because we know Mark in Season 2 should be above both of those teams since he is by far the strongest superhero on Earth, and Mark basically, while casual, Sun the Immortal. And while the answer to this question might feel obvious, in my opinion it's not actually that obvious of who's the strongest between Hood Invincible, Omni Invincible, and Mohawk Invincible. And all three of them do have arguments to suggest they are the strongest among them. Yes, even Hood Invincible might have some arguments to suggest he is the strongest Invincible variant. However, up first I'm going to go with the person who I think actually has the weakest arguments to suggest he is the strongest, and then I'm going to go in order, which that person is surprisingly Movincimark. Now I do want to preface these feats because I think this is the same for all of them. I don't think Invincible is holding back against any of the Invincible variants. I think he is using all the power he can access without his rage, mainly because of the fact that he knows how strong the Invincible variants are, or at least has some relative idea. I doubt he's going to try and hold back against any of them. Invincible is able to fight Mohawk Mark in a one-on-one fight, and clash with him for a pretty long while, until Invincible discombobulates Mark by hitting him against both of his ears, knocking him out for a couple of moments. Then Mohawk Mark ends up taking some hits from powerplex and ends up getting jumped by 4 heroes. The 4 heroes, Mark included, end up jumping Mohawk Mark and defeating him. However, after Invincible leaves, at some point Mohawk Mark is able to escape them rather than actually being left behind or being killed by them. And finally, he is one of the 8 remaining Invincibles that survived, and outright said the other Invincibles were pathetic and he would have killed them all eventually himself. And at first, I thought these feats were a lot better than they were. You guys might actually be able to see in my previous videos, I thought Mohawk Mark was pretty strong. However, my opinion on that has shifted, as now I'm going to talk about why I don't think his arguments for him being the strongest is as good as they were before. Now first, I thought that Mark needed to discombobulate Mark spoke towards him taking him a little bit more seriously and just using that method for victory. However, I don't really think that's the case anymore, mainly because when Mark was fighting against Hood Mark with Eve assisting him, he never tried that strategy to knock them out. Which is especially telling for me because he fought Mohawk Mark previously but never tried it on Hood Mark, despite trying his best to make sure as little heroes as possible ended up dying. Which either tells me that A, Mark had tried and it failed, or B, Mark didn't think it was possible for him to be able to do that. And then there's finally the statement of Mohawk Mark saying that he would have killed the other marks because they were pathetic. However, that statement seems to be more made from ignorance if anything, because he never really saw any of the other marks fighting. And it could be narrative support as well that the other 8 marks are the strongest and Hood Mark is not one of the strongest. However, we actually need to analyze and break down the fight to see if the fight supports that narrative or not. Which is a good way to segue us right into both talking about Hood Mark as well as Omni Mark. And the reason why I'm going to talk about both of them at once is because Omni Mark joins into that fight. And that is sorta Omni Mark's only fight in the actual series. But first let's talk about Hood Mark and his feats. Hood Mark started off the day by fighting against 3 heroes at the same time, basically going through a gauntlet of heroes, and intentionally taking hits from them, mainly just a way to brag. After all, he did tell them that they were all just a fraction of his power. He then took an off-guard hit from Invincible. Then he fights against Adam, Eve, Invincible, and the 3 other heroes off-screen. We don't know how long they fight for, but it's for a pretty decent amount of time. After taking a full-on combo from them, he admits that the both of them are rather tough, and he says that they might have been able to beat him if they weren't so focused on protecting the other heroes. Which all 3 of the other heroes did end up dying in that fight. Omnimark does show up in order to back up Hoodmark, but well, that entire exchange happens. But something really interesting about Hoodmark is the fact that he's still rather confident he can take on the both of them alone, considering he does say, "I got this," even though he previously had just said that if the two of them weren't focused on protecting the other heroes, they might have actually been able to take him out then. Then Omnimark and Hoodmark ended up fighting against our Mainmark for a little bit, with Omnimark going to focus on Eve. And then Hoodmark fought Mainmark for a little bit, with him dodging several of Mainmark's blows until Hoodmark was thrown by our Mainmark. Then our Mainmark battled against Omnimark for a little bit as well, swinging him by the cape until Hoodmark joined back in. Most of the fight was just Hoodmark and Omnimark tag teaming against our Mainmark, until Omnimark broke Eve's leg, leading to Mainmark getting angry and pushing Hoodmark into Omnimark and pushing the two of them away. Though notably neither of them took too much damage from that, and then finally the Reaniman showed up. And while Omnimark does survive to the third day, Hoodmark does not survive. And while you could say Hood died to those three Reaniman, we really don't know the circumstances for how he died. For all we know, Omnimark had to leave him behind and left Hoodmark to have to battle against 6 at once, when he should already be battle damaged considering he fought Adam Even Mark for much longer. Now it should be noted, at least by my knowledge, Omnimark doesn't have the same statement that he had killed his own father. It might have been confirmed on Twitter that Omnimark did kill his own dad, like in the comics, but by my knowledge currently, I do not know. So between these three marks, who is the strongest? Well, no matter what, I think we do have to delete Mohawk Mark from this list, mainly because the discombobulation method did work on him, but it was never tried on Hoodmark. Despite them debatably having an easier circumstance to try and do this, yet it was never tried on him. So for that reason, I kinda have to put Hoodmark above Mohawk Mark. But if that would be effective, then Mark would have done so by that point, especially when they were comboing Mohawk Mark, yet he didn't. Which likely means that any time that he tried, Mohawk Mark just was able to counter it. Now yes, we don't know how that fight went, but at the same time, the fact he never tried it kinda says a lot. Omnimark just displays relative physicality to Hoodmark. And now we're going to talk about the two final strongest Invincibles, that being Hoodmark as well as Omnimark, and which is stronger between the two of them. Now first I'm going to go over Omnimark, since Omnimark is definitely the favorite to win out of the three I've talked about, and especially these two. With the main and pretty obvious argument being he was the one who survived. He was the one who survived that encounter. He was one of the 8 surviving Invincibles, so shouldn't he be the strongest? After all, he does have actual feats as well. However, now I'm going to go over to Hoodmark and his side, because he actually does have some arguments that I didn't think of. Because if I'm going to be honest with you guys, before I came into this video, I thought Hoodmark was going to be dead last. I thought Hoodmark was going to be below Mohawk Mark, but the more and more I looked at it, the more and more I realized this man might actually be a lot more impressive than I thought. Up first, he has a three-way gauntlet against heroes where he lets them hit him, all to brag against them, then takes an off-guard hit from Invincible, then does a 5v1 where he still manages to kill 3 of the heroes despite our main Mark and Eve being there to combo against him. And sure, yes, he does say that if Mark was focused on fighting him rather than trying to save those other heroes and protect them, he might have been able to beat him already, but that says a lot more about his strength than you might think, mainly because that implies he likely had some openings that he would have had if he wasn't protecting the other heroes, i.e. if Mark was mainly focused on trying to fight against Hoodmark, he might have actually been able to beat him and take those openings. And despite taking a beating and several hits from the main Mark, he was able to display several feats relative to our Omni Mark. In fact, he was the one fighting main Mark for most of the time, despite being injured and physically exhausted. So if I'm going by feats, and if I'm being honest, when I look deeper into the fight, I'm actually leaning closer to saying Hood Invincible might actually be stronger than Omni Invincible. However, this is where narrative also comes in. If you believe it's narratively implied that the 8 remaining Invincibles that survived were supposed to be the strongest Invincibles, the cream of the crop, and that's the entire narrative behind it, then yeah, Hood Invincible is number 9 and all of them just scale above him. And if you believe Omni Invincible actually surviving the encounter is a sign that Hoodmark is weaker than him, then I wouldn't blame you for that one either. After all, that's how I took it initially. But now I lean closer to it being Hoodvincible is the stronger one, and that's actually kind of a surprise to me because I came into this video fully expecting to put Hoodvincible at the weakest position, but as I looked more and more into his feats, the more and more I realized he might actually be number 2 to Invincible. Maybe number 3 when we count for Sinister Mark, but still. But I will say there's also no wrong order you can go with this. Hell, if you wanted to, you could put Mohawk Mark in front of the two of them. If you think Mohawk Mark being able to 1v1 Mark is more valuable than the other two needing to team up, then yeah, I can honestly see the argument. But in my opinion, the order would currently go Hood Mark and then Omni Mark and then finally Mohawk Mark. Though that's mainly going off of feats. If I were to go off of narrative, I think I would put Omni Mark above Hood Mark. Though reminder, this is also only going off the feats we currently have in the TV show. For all we know, things could end up changing in the future. However, I'm curious if you guys agree with my reasoning. Do you guys think that someone else is stronger? I want to hear your arguments down in the comment section down below. Anyways, I'm gonna see y'all later. Hope y'all have a good day. Peace out.